Kansas, 1882. A place where dust storms could bury dreams as quickly as they buried homesteads, and where a woman's face determined her fate more than her character ever could. They don't tell you about the women who believed their worth ended where their reflection began. The ones who learned to apologize for existing, who carried shame like a second skin, who offered their labor as penance for not being beautiful enough to deserve kindness. On a scorching August morning when the sun turned the prairie into an oven, and desperation hung in the air thick as smoke, a young woman stood before a black rancher with dirt under her fingernails and defeat in her eyes. She didn't ask for charity. She didn't beg for mercy. She simply stated what she believed was the only truth about herself that mattered. "I'm not pretty, but I can work." 7 words that contained a lifetime of rejection. 7 words that said everything about how the world had treated her, and nothing about who she truly was. But sometimes, the right person hears what you're really saying beneath the words. Sometimes, a look can rewrite a story you thought was already finished. Sometimes dignity comes from the most unexpected source, offered by someone who knows exactly what it means to be judged by something you can't control. What happens when someone finally sees you, truly sees you for the first time in your life? What happens when a man who society told had no value recognizes the worth in a woman society said was worthless? Stay until the very end, because what unfolds in the next hour will challenge everything you think you know about beauty, worth, and what it really means to be seen as human. Before we continue, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt invisible? Have you ever believed that who you are wasn't enough? Then this story is for you, and I need you to hit that subscribe button right now. Why? Because here at the Black Rancher, we tell the stories that matter, the ones about people society tried to erase, about moments of human decency that changed everything. These aren't just stories. These are reminders that worth isn't determined by what others see when they look at you, but by what you carry inside. And if that resonates with you, if you believe these voices deserve to be heard, then subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more people who hear these stories, the harder it becomes to pretend they never happened. Now let's ride. The High Plains Ranch sat like a defiant promise against the Kansas horizon, 3,000 acres of stubborn grass and harder dirt that most folks said couldn't be tamed. But Caleb Turner wasn't most folks. At 43 years old, Caleb had spent the last 15 years proving that a black man could build something lasting in a territory that didn't want him to succeed. His ranch wasn't the biggest, but it was his, purchased with money earned from breaking horses. Other men were too scared to touch, and from working harder than 3 men combined. The main house was modest, built from Kansas limestone with a wide porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. The barn was larger, solid, with corrals that held 24 horses in various stages of training. A bunkhouse stood 50 yards from the main structure, currently housing 4 ranch hands, 2 Mexican, 1 Irish, 1 Creek Indian. Caleb hired based on ability, not appearance, which made him unusual among ranch owners and absolutely hated among the town's respectable citizens. On this particular August morning, Caleb stood in his barn running a brush along the flank of a sorrel mare when he heard footsteps, hesitant and uneven, coming up the drive. He didn't look up immediately. Visitors were rare, and those who came usually brought trouble dressed up as opportunity. "Mr. Turner?" The voice was female, young, and carried the weight of exhaustion that went beyond physical tiredness. Caleb set down his brush and turned. The woman standing in the barn entrance was perhaps 25, maybe younger, with brown hair pulled back so severely it looked painful. Her dress was clean, but worn thin in places, mended so many times the original fabric was hard to distinguish from the patches. Her hands were red and rough, the hands of someone who'd spent their life working without rest. But it was her eyes that caught his attention, not because they were remarkable, but because they held the exact expression he'd seen in broken horses, the ones that had been beaten so often they'd stopped trying to escape. "That's me," Caleb said, his voice even and calm. "Something I can help you with." The woman's hands twisted together, a nervous gesture that spoke of long practice. "I heard. That is, someone in town said you might be looking for help. ranch work. Caleb waited. There was more coming, he could tell. People didn't trek 5 miles out from Hutchinson in August heat just to ask about work. They came with stories, with baggage, with desperation. "I can work," she continued, the words coming faster now, like she had to get them out before courage failed. "I'm strong, I can cook, clean, mend, tend animals. I don't eat much, I don't complain. I can work from dawn until dark, and I won't cause trouble, I just—" She paused, swallowed hard. "I need a position, any position. I'll take whatever wages you think fair." Caleb studied her face. There was something she wasn't saying, something important hanging in the air between them like smoke. He'd learned, over years of reading horses and people, that what folks didn't say often mattered more than what they did. "What's your name?" he asked. Grace Whitmore." "Where are you coming from, Miss Whitmore?" "The boarding house in town, Mrs. Henderson's place. I've been working there for 3 years, but—" She stopped, her jaw tightening. "She let me go last week, said she couldn't keep me on anymore." "Why's that?" Grace's face colored slightly, not with embarrassment, but with something darker, angrier. "She said I was scaring away potential boarders, said my appearance made people uncomfortable at the breakfast table." And there it was, the truth she'd been circling. Caleb looked at her more carefully now, not with pity but with attention. Grace Whitmore wasn't ugly, not in any objective sense. Her features were plain but regular, her build solid but not unattractive. But she lacked the delicate prettiness that society demanded from women, the ornamental quality that made men feel comfortable and women feel superior. "I see," Caleb said quietly. "I'm not pretty," Grace said suddenly, the words bursting out like they'd been held back too long. "I know that. Everyone knows that. I've known it since I was 12 years old and boys started looking past me like I was furniture. But I can work, Mr. Turner. I can work harder than anyone you've ever hired. I don't need Sundays off. I don't need new dresses or hair ribbons or any of that foolishness. I just need a place where I can earn my keep and not have to see people's faces when they look at me and decide I'm not worth their time." The barn was silent except for the shuffle of horses and the distant call of a meadowlark. Caleb set down the brush he'd been holding and walked closer, stopping a respectful distance away. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying a gentleness that seemed at odds with his 6-foot frame and work-hardened hands. "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to hear it, really hear it. Can you do that?" Grace nodded, her eyes wary. "When I look at you, I don't see what Mrs. Henderson saw. I don't see what those boys saw when you were 12. I don't see someone who needs to apologize for existing or earn the right to be treated with basic human dignity." He paused, letting the words settle. "What I see is someone who's been told lies for so long they started believing them. Someone who's learned to measure their worth by other people's ignorance. Someone who thinks they need to work themselves to death just to justify taking up space in the world." Grace's breath caught, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "You want to know what I really see?" Caleb continued. "I see a woman who walked 5 miles in August heat to ask for work, not charity. I see someone with enough pride to stand straight even when the world's been trying to bend them. I see a survivor, Miss Whitmore, and survivors are worth more than all the pretty, delicate things society tries to tell us matter." The silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning. Grace's hands had stopped their nervous movement. She stood perfectly still, like someone who'd just heard something in a language they'd forgotten they once knew. "Now," Caleb said, his tone becoming more businesslike, "about that position. I am looking for help, that's true. But not just anyone. I need someone who can manage a household, supervise the cooking for 5 ranch hands, keep accounts, and help with the horses when needed. The hours are long, the work is hard, and the pay is $30 a month plus room and board." He watched her face carefully. "That's more than most ranch housekeepers make because I pay for competence and character, not for decorative value. But here's what I need to know. Can you actually do this work? Not for me, not to prove something to Mrs. Henderson or those boys who looked past you. For yourself. Can you do it because you want to build something, contribute something, be part of something that matters?" Grace's chin came up slightly, and for the first time, Caleb saw something other than defeat in her eyes. He saw possibility. "I can," she said, her voice stronger now. "I want to. Then the job's yours if you want it. You'll have a room in the main house, separate entrance, your own space. You'll eat at the same table as everyone else, and you'll be addressed with respect, or whoever disrespects you will be looking for work elsewhere. Those are the conditions. What do you say?" Grace Whitmore looked at the black rancher who'd just spoken to her like she was a person of value, who'd offered her dignity instead of pity, who'd seen worth where everyone else saw only absence. "When do I start?" she whispered. Caleb smiled, and it transformed his face completely. "Right now, if you're willing. We've got accounts that need reconciling, and my last attempt at biscuits could have been used for construction material. Think you can do better?" For the first time in years, Grace Whitmore smiled back. "Yes, sir. I believe I can." The first week at High Plains Ranch rewrote everything Grace thought she knew about work, about worth, and about what it meant to be seen. Caleb Turner ran his operation like a well-oiled machine, but unlike other ranchers Grace had heard about, he didn't rule through fear or intimidation. He led through example, through respect, and through a kind of quiet competence that made even the hardest tasks seem manageable. The ranch hands were unlike any crew Grace had encountered. There was Miguel and his younger brother Carlos, both expert horsemen who'd fled persecution in Chihuahua and found sanctuary at High Plains. There was Patrick O'Brien, an Irishman with a quick wit and quicker hands with a rope. And there was Samuel Two Rivers, a Creek man who could track anything that moved and had a gift with animals that bordered on supernatural. None of them stared at Grace like she was a curiosity. None of them made jokes at her expense or treated her like she was less than human. When she first joined them for dinner in the main house, sitting at the long table Caleb had built himself, they'd nodded respectfully and asked her to pass the potatoes like it was the most natural thing in the world. It was so different from Mrs. Henderson's boarding house that Grace didn't know how to process it. At Henderson's, she'd eaten in the kitchen after everyone else finished, standing up while washing dishes. She'd learned to make herself invisible, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to apologize for existing in spaces where her presence made others uncomfortable. Here, Caleb insisted she sit down, insisted she serve herself first, insisted that if anyone had complaints about the food, they could cook it themselves next time. "Miss Whitmore prepared this meal," he'd said on her second day, when Miguel had jokingly complained that the beans were spicier than usual. And she did it after spending 4 hours reorganizing the tack room and mending every torn shirt in the bunkhouse. So if the beans are too spicy for your delicate constitution, Miguel, there's bread and butter. Otherwise, eat with gratitude or eat in silence. Miguel had grinned, raised his hands in surrender, and complimented the spice level for the rest of the meal. That was Caleb's way. He protected his people fiercely but without drama, established boundaries clearly but without cruelty, and expected excellence while acknowledging effort. By the end of her first week, Grace had fallen into a rhythm. She woke before dawn, started the coffee, began breakfast while Caleb and the hands tended to the first round of horse care. She managed the household accounts with an attention to detail that impressed Caleb, who'd been struggling with bookkeeping for years. She mended, cleaned, organized, and cooked with an efficiency born from years of practice. But more than the work itself, what changed Grace was the way people at High Plains treated her. Patrick always said, "Good morning," and "Thank you." Carlos insisted on carrying heavy items for her not because he thought she was weak, but because, as he said, "My mama would haunt me if I didn't help when I could." Samuel Two Rivers barely spoke, but when he did, his words carried weight and were always respectful. And Caleb Turner treated her like her thoughts mattered. On Friday evening, after the hands had retired to the bunkhouse and the dishes were clean, Caleb found Grace on the porch staring out at the darkening prairie. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. Grace shook her head, and Caleb settled into the chair beside her with a satisfied groan. "Long week," he said. "Yes, sir." "Caleb," he corrected gently. "No need for sir when it's just us talking." Grace nodded but didn't speak. She'd learned over the years that silence was safer than words, that offering opinions was an invitation for correction. "What's on your mind, Miss Whitmore?" Caleb asked after a moment. Grace hesitated, then decided that honesty, after everything, was deserved. "I keep waiting," she said quietly. "For what?" for it to change. For you to change. For someone to say something cruel, or to look at me the way people have always looked at me, like I'm... She paused, searching for the right words. Like I'm something unfortunate they have to tolerate. Caleb was quiet for a moment, rocking slightly in his chair. You know why I built this ranch? He finally asked. Grace shook her head. I built it because I spent the first 28 years of my life being told what I couldn't do, couldn't own property, couldn't be trusted with responsibility, couldn't be anything other than what white folks decided I could be. And I got tired, Miss Whitmore. Not physically tired, though God knows there was that too. But soul tired. Tired of proving my humanity. Tired of earning basic respect like it was a privilege instead of a right. He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his face was serious but not unkind. So when I finally got the chance to build something of my own, I decided it would be a place where people were valued for what they contributed, not for what they looked like or where they came from. A place where respect was the starting point, not something you had to earn through suffering. That must have been hard, Grace said softly. Caleb laughed, a short, sharp sound. Hard doesn't begin to cover it. You know how many banks turned me down? How many land agents suddenly had nothing available when I walked in? How many so-called respectable citizens tried to run me off this property with everything from legal challenges to nighttime visits with threats? Grace hadn't known, but she wasn't surprised. I'm still here, Caleb continued, because I refused to let their limitations become my limitations. And that's what I see in you, Miss Whitmore. Someone who's been carrying other people's limitations for so long you forgot they weren't yours to begin with. Grace felt something crack open inside her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. I don't know how to stop, she whispered. Start small, Caleb said. Start with believing that you deserve to sit on this porch without apologizing for it, that you deserve to eat at the table, to have opinions, to take up space in the world. The rest will come. They sat in companionable silence as the stars began to appear, and Grace thought that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to understand what it felt like to be treated like a person instead of a problem. Before we continue with Grace's journey, I want to ask you something. How many times have you been told you weren't enough? How many times have you apologized for existing, for taking up space, for having needs? If this story is hitting home, if you see yourself in Grace or recognize the kind of dignity that Caleb offers, then I need you to do something for me. Subscribe to The Black Rancher if you haven't already, and hit that share button. Why? Because these stories matter. They matter because they remind us that worth isn't determined by society's shallow standards. They matter because they show us that dignity can come from the most unexpected places. And they matter because somewhere, someone needs to hear that they're valuable exactly as they are. This isn't just entertainment. This is remembrance. This is honoring the people who built lives of meaning despite a world that told them they didn't matter. So share this story. Let it reach someone who needs to hear it. Now let's see what happens when the town learns about Grace's new position. The trouble started, as it often did in small frontier towns, with gossip, judgment, and people who had too much time to worry about other people's business. Grace had been at High Plains Ranch for 3 weeks when she accompanied Caleb into Hutchinson for supplies. She'd tried to suggest staying behind, but Caleb had been insistent. You're part of this operation now, he'd said. And part of this operation means being seen, being present, being counted. Besides, you know what we need better than I do at this point. So Grace had climbed up onto the wagon seat beside him, wearing a clean dress and her best bonnet, feeling exposed and vulnerable in a way she hadn't felt since arriving at the ranch. Hutchinson was a typical Kansas frontier town, built around a main street with false front buildings that promised more grandeur than they delivered. There was a general store, a feed store, a blacksmith, 2 saloons, a church, and a boarding house. The same boarding house where Mrs. Henderson had dismissed Grace 3 weeks earlier. As they rode down Main Street, Grace could feel eyes on them. Could see the way conversations stopped, the way heads turned, the way judgment crystallized in the air like frost. Caleb seemed unbothered, tipping his hat to folks who acknowledged him and ignoring those who didn't. They pulled up in front of Brennan's general store, and Caleb helped Grace down from the wagon with the same courtesy he'd show any lady. Take your time, he said. Get everything on the list and anything else you think we need. I'll be at the feed store. Grace nodded and walked into Brennan's, her head held high despite the fear churning in her stomach. The store was dim and cool, smelling of leather and tobacco and the 1,000 small items that frontier life required. Mr. Brennan looked up from behind his counter, his expression neutral but not unwelcoming. "Miss Whitmore," he said, "didn't expect to see you." "Mr. Brennan," Grace replied, pulling out her list. "I need to place an order for High Plains Ranch." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you working for Turner now?" "Yes, sir." Before Brennan could respond, the door opened behind Grace and Mrs. Henderson swept in, followed by 2 other women from town, Mrs. Sullivan and Mrs. Pierce, both wives of local businessmen and pillars of what passed for society in Hutchinson. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. "Well," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Grace Whitmore. I heard rumors, but I didn't quite believe them." Grace turned slowly, keeping her face neutral. "Mrs. Henderson, is it true then? You're working at that ranch?" The way she said "that ranch" made it sound like something shameful, something to be whispered about behind hands. "I'm managing the household at High Plains Ranch, yes." Mrs. Sullivan stepped forward, her face tight with disapproval. "Managing the household? Is that what they're calling it now?" Grace felt her face flush, understanding the implication immediately. "Mrs." Pierce tittered behind her hand, and Mrs. Henderson's expression sharpened with malicious satisfaction. "Now, let's not pretend we don't all know what's really happening out there," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice rising so that everyone in the store could hear. "A woman like you living alone with a black man and his rough crew of hands, there's only one reason a man like Turner would hire someone like you, dear." The words hit like physical blows. Grace felt the familiar weight of shame trying to settle over her shoulders, the old instinct to apologize, to make herself small, to accept whatever cruelty was directed at her. But something had changed in the last 3 weeks, something fundamental. "You're right," Grace said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "There is a reason Mr. Turner hired me. He hired me because I'm competent, because I can manage accounts, run a household, and contribute meaningfully to a successful operation. He hired me because he judges people by their character and their abilities, not by their appearance or their social connections." She took a step closer to Mrs. Henderson, and the older woman actually stepped back. "You dismissed me because my face made your boarders uncomfortable at breakfast. Not because I couldn't do the work, not because I wasn't loyal or honest or hardworking, but because I didn't meet your standards of ornamental acceptability." "How dare you?" Mrs. Henderson sputtered. "How dare I what?" Grace continued, and now there was steel in her voice, strength she didn't know she possessed. "How dare I work for someone who treats me with respect? How dare I refuse to accept your judgment as the final word on my worth? How dare I live my life without your approval?" Mrs. Pierce opened her mouth to speak, but Grace cut her off. "If you're concerned about impropriety, perhaps you should examine your own behavior. Coming into this store solely to humiliate someone you dismissed, spreading vicious rumors based on nothing but your own narrow prejudices. That's what's improper, Mrs. Henderson. That's what's shameful." The store had gone completely silent. Mr. Brennan stood behind his counter with his mouth slightly open. 2 other customers had frozen in place, watching the confrontation like it was theater. "Mr. Brennan," Grace said, turning back to the shopkeeper and ignoring the 3 women completely. "I have a list of supplies needed at High Plains Ranch. If you'd prefer not to do business with us, I understand, and we'll take our money elsewhere. But if you're willing, I'd appreciate your help filling this order." Brennan looked at Grace, then at Mrs. Henderson and her companions, then back at Grace. Something shifted in his expression, some decision being made in real time. "Let me see that list," he said, reaching for it. "And Miss Whitmore, Turner's credit is good here. Always has been, always will be." It was a small thing, but it meant everything. Grace felt tears prick her eyes, but blinked them back. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." Mrs. Henderson made a sound of disgust and swept toward the door, her companions following like ducklings. But before she left, she turned back one last time. "You'll regret this, Grace Whitmore. Decent people won't forget." Neither will I, Grace replied. Neither will I. When Grace told Caleb what had happened at Brennan's store, she expected anger, maybe protectiveness, perhaps even concern about the ranch's reputation in town. What she got instead was pride. You stood up for yourself, he said simply, nodding with satisfaction as they ate dinner that evening. Told them the truth and didn't back down. That takes courage, Miss Whitmore. I probably made things worse, Grace said, pushing food around her plate. Mrs. Henderson has influence in town. She could make life difficult. She already was making life difficult, Patrick O'Brien interjected, reaching for more potatoes. From what you've told us, she's been making your life difficult for years. But now she'll make it difficult for all of you, Grace protested. For the ranch, for Mr. Turner. I shouldn't have... Stop, Caleb said, not unkindly. Stop apologizing for defending yourself. Stop carrying the weight of other people's prejudices. Mrs. Henderson's opinions are her problem, not yours, not mine, not this ranch's. Miguel nodded agreement. We've dealt with worse than small-town gossip, Miss Grace. Much worse. Besides, Carlos added with a grin, your biscuits are worth any amount of town drama. The table laughed, and Grace felt some of the tension leave her shoulders, but she couldn't shake the worry entirely. She'd seen what happened when people like Mrs. Henderson decided someone needed to be punished, seen how quickly a community could turn, how easily cruelty could be justified in the name of propriety. That night, lying in her small room off the main house, Grace stared at the ceiling and wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. Not in standing up for herself, but in staying at all. Maybe she should leave before things got worse, before her presence brought real trouble to people who'd shown her nothing but kindness. She was still wrestling with these thoughts the next morning when Samuel Two Rivers came riding hard into the ranch yard, his face tight with concern. Caleb met him at the porch. What's wrong? Trouble in town, Samuel said, swinging down from his horse. I was picking up that order from the blacksmith, and I heard talking. Some of the men, including Henderson's husband, they're planning to ride out here tonight, to have words about Grace staying on the ranch. Grace, who'd been listening from the doorway, felt her blood run cold. I'll leave, she said immediately. I'll pack right now. I can be gone before they arrive. Caleb turned to her, and his expression was harder than she'd ever seen it. You'll do no such thing. But, no, Caleb said firmly. You're not running. Not from them, not from this. You've done nothing wrong, Miss Whitmore. Nothing. And I'll be damned if I let a bunch of small-minded men chase off a member of my household because they don't like that someone treated you with basic human dignity. They could hurt you, Grace said, tears threatening. They could burn the ranch, kill the horses, hurt the hands, all because of me. Caleb walked closer, and his voice when he spoke was gentle but absolutely certain. Listen to me, Grace. The moment we let fear dictate our actions, the moment we compromise our values to appease bullies, we lose something essential. These men don't care about propriety or morality. They care about power, about keeping people like you and me in our place. And if we give in now, we'll be giving in forever. He's right, Patrick said, stepping out onto the porch. The other hands had gathered as well, their faces serious but determined. We stand together, or we don't stand at all. Miguel nodded. My brother and I fled men with guns and power. We won't run from small-town merchants with big mouths. I've been run off better land by meaner men, Samuel added. They didn't succeed then. They won't succeed now. Grace looked at these 5 men who were willing to risk everything. Not for personal gain, not for profit, but for principle. For her. What do we do? She asked, wiping her eyes. Caleb smiled, and there was steel in it. We prepare a welcome. And we teach these gentlemen that High Plains Ranch isn't the place to test their courage. The rest of the day was spent in quiet, efficient preparation. Not for violence, Caleb was clear about that, but for defense and for witness. He sent Carlos into town with a message for the county sheriff, documenting the threat and requesting presence. He positioned the hands strategically around the property, not with weapons drawn, but with clear visibility. And he insisted that Grace stay visible, stay present, stay exactly where she belonged. They need to see that intimidation doesn't work, he explained, that we're not hiding, not ashamed, not afraid. As dusk approached, 6 men rode up the long drive to High Plains Ranch. Mr. Henderson was in front, flanked by 5 other town businessmen, all trying to look more formidable than they were. They stopped 50 yards from the house, and Caleb walked out to meet them, flanked by his hands. Grace stood on the porch, her heart pounding but her head high. "Turner," Henderson called out, his voice trying for authority but landing closer to bluster. "We need to talk about your situation here." "My situation is none of your concern, Henderson," Caleb replied evenly. "It is when it involves a woman's reputation and the moral character of this community. Having that woman living here, without proper oversight, without your permission," Caleb interrupted. "Without your approval. Miss Whitmore is employed here legally, paid fairly, and housed appropriately. What possible business is that of yours?" "People are talking," one of the other men said. "It doesn't look right." "Then perhaps those people should find better things to discuss," Caleb replied. "Perhaps they should examine their own lives before passing judgment on others." Henderson's face reddened. "Now you listen here, Turner. We've tolerated your presence in this county, tolerated your uppity ways and your mixed crew of—" "Tolerated?" Caleb's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You've tolerated me. I own this land legally. I pay my taxes. I employ people who contribute to this county's economy. I don't need your tolerance, Henderson. I need you to mind your own business and leave my people alone." "Your people?" Henderson sneered. "That woman isn't your people. She's just someone too desperate to know better than to—" "Careful," Caleb said, his voice quiet but carrying across the distance like a gunshot. "Very careful what you say next, Henderson, because there are witnesses here, including Samuel, who happens to be deputized for the county. And what you're about to say sounds an awful lot like slander, maybe even a threat. That's a legal matter. Are you prepared for a legal matter?" Henderson hesitated, clearly not having expected legal pushback. The men with him shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Whitmore," Caleb called, not taking his eyes off Henderson. "Would you come here, please?" Grace walked down from the porch, her legs steady despite her fear. She stood beside Caleb, and he nodded to her with something like pride. "Tell these gentlemen what you told Mrs. Henderson at the store yesterday." Grace took a breath and looked directly at the men who'd ridden out to intimidate her into compliance. "I told her that I work here because Mr. Turner judges people by their character and abilities, not by their appearance or social status, that I'm employed legally, paid fairly, and treated with respect, and that I refuse to accept the judgment of people who value cruelty over kindness. You should also tell them," Caleb added, "about the letter I sent today to the Territorial Attorney's Office detailing your employment contract, your wages, and the legal protections afforded to you under territorial law, along with a request for investigation into any intimidation or harassment you might experience." Henderson's face went white, then red. "You're threatening us?" "I'm protecting my employee," Caleb corrected, "from harassment, from slander, from exactly this kind of attempted intimidation. You rode onto my property to threaten a woman's livelihood because you don't approve of her choices. That's not morality, Henderson. That's cruelty dressed up as righteousness." The silence that followed was heavy. The 6 men looked at each other, suddenly aware that they were on the wrong side of both law and decency, that their attempt at intimidation had been documented, witnessed, and legally countered. Finally, Henderson pulled his horse's head around. "This isn't over, Turner." "Yes," Caleb said quietly. "It is. And if you or anyone else comes onto my property again without invitation, if you harass Miss Whitmore or any of my people, I'll pursue every legal remedy available. And in case you're wondering, I have the resources and the patience to follow through. Do we understand each other?" Henderson didn't answer, just spurred his horse and rode off, his companions following. When they were out of sight, Grace let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "It's really over?" she asked. "For now," Caleb said. "But even if it's not, you're staying. You belong here, Grace, and nobody gets to tell you otherwise." Grace looked at the black rancher, who'd defended her with legal strategy and moral courage, who'd risked his standing and his safety to protect her right to live with dignity. and she knew with absolute certainty that she'd finally found something she'd stopped believing existed. She'd found home. If Grace's story moved you, if Caleb's stand for dignity over intimidation resonated with you, then I need you to do something right now. Subscribe to The Black Rancher and hit that notification bell. Why? Because these stories aren't just history, they're mirrors showing us who we can choose to be. Every time someone told Grace she wasn't enough, society was really saying, "You don't fit our narrow definition, so you don't matter." Every time Caleb stood firm, he was saying, "Dignity is non-negotiable and worth doesn't come from approval." These lessons matter today just as much as they did in 1882. How we treat people society deems less valuable says everything about who we are as humans, as communities, as a nation. And the more we remember stories like this, the harder it becomes to forget those lessons. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell me which moment in this story impacted you most. Was it Grace standing up to Mrs. Henderson? Caleb's defense of his employee? The ranch hands standing together? Let me know, because your voices matter, your stories matter, and together we ensure that these histories are never forgotten. Thank you for spending this time with us at The Black Rancher. Thank you for caring about dignity, about worth, about the revolutionary act of treating people like they matter. These aren't just good stories. They're reminders of who we're capable of being when we choose courage over comfort, principle over popularity. Until next time, remember, your worth isn't determined by how others see you. It's determined by how you treat yourself and others when no one's watching. Grace learned that, Caleb lived it, and maybe, just maybe we can too. This is The Black Rancher, reminding you that the most revolutionary act in a world built on shallow judgments is to see people for who they truly are and to treat them accordingly.